by a strange fluke of luck, my first job was trapping and radio collaring grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So that spoiled me for life. That was 1976, and it was the exact same year that Larry Aumiller started with McNeil as manager of McNeil. The funny part is Larry stuck with bears and McNeil for the rest of his life, professional life at least. And I went, after 1 year, I went back with loons for the rest of my professional life, but I've never gotten bears out of my system. And even when I was up north at above 70 degrees north latitude, looking for yellow-billed loons, I instead one day found a grizzly bear den that I tried on for size. And another time in the Arctic on the north slope of the Western Brooks, still in the foothills, I was following the Western Arctic caribou herd for a story I was writing for Audubon. And it was July, but there was a blizzard that came over us and high winds, and it was actually blowing my tent down. It was collapsing it on me at night. So I picked up and reconstructed things inside the fuselage of a wrecked airplane to get out of the wind. Little did I know that until next morning that I was sharing that airplane with a grizzly bear. So I think I'm the only wildlife biologist in the world, maybe the only person in the world, who's ever spent the night with a grizzly bear in a C-46. I've made 3 trips to McNeil with Larry. And I've known Larry and his wife forever. And I've known their daughter, their darling daughter, Kiana, to whom this book is dedicated. Well, McNeil's River State Game Sanctuary is right there off of McNeil Cove of Kamishak Bay. It was founded in, well, actually blessed by the state legislature in 1967. The game refuge north of it came later, and McNeil is now at 200 square miles. And I want to read just a little bit, and I'm sorry, this sounds so boring, but a little bit of the legislation that established the sanctuary, because this is the goals that Larry had to follow. And as shy as he is about taking credit, he says, I just followed the rules. But actually, he made up a lot of the rules to reach these goals. So what were the legislature's intentions? Here's the actual language. A, the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary is established to 1, provide permanent protection for brown bear and other wildlife populations and their habitats so that these resources may be preserved for scientific, aesthetic, and educational purposes. 2, manage human use and activities in a way that is compatible with number 1 of this subsection, and to maintain and enhance the unique bear viewing opportunities within the sanctuary. Those were Larry's basic guiding rules. Well, why is McNeil so, let me just go back there, whoops. All this coast along this area here, most of it is cliffs. And salmon can't swim up a waterfall to get to a stream to spawn in. But as I showed you before, McNeil is right down in an unusual geological flatland. This is actually the mouth of McNeil River coming into the estuary. And there's a long spit here. And then you get out into McNeil Cove off of Kamishak Bay, so that basically the fish can actually migrate up into McNeil River. And they do. There was another geological burp there that raised some hard rock about 2 miles upstream, so that there are a falls there, or at least a heavy rapids. And the salmon, in this case, on McNeil, it's chums, and they're likely to pull up at the base of those falls and sort of get ready to make their leaps. And it's this pool of salmon that brings in the bears. And it's the bears that brought in Larry Aumiller. One of the key things, how Larry got this job, which he calls the best summer job in the world, how he got it is an interesting story, but I'm not going to go into it here. I want to give you a little look at, or actually a soundbite from the book itself in the way I introduced Larry there. And this happened on his 30th year, his last year as manager, with all the savvy packed into him. And we had been out viewing bears, and he was leading a group of 10. And we got on our way back, we got right down to the estuary, which we had to cross to get back to camp. And it was an incoming tide, but we figured we were early enough to make it with hip boots. And when we got down to almost the shore, we saw 2 bears on our left, and they were yearlings, and they were 2 cubs playing. And we looked around, and then to our right, about 100 yards off, was their mom. This is how Larry handled that situation. Careful and conservative as he is in such situations, he has suggested we pause here. One of his guiding tenets across 3 decades in this job is to not intrude enough to change a bear's behavior, and he'd rather not disturb this young family. Aumiller carries a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with slugs, a state requirement, but in 30 years, he's never had to shoot a charging bear, and he prefers not to spoil that record. The weapon remains lashed to the side of his pack. So we wait. We make a modicum of noise to subtly reiterate our presence. We watch. One of the cubs rolls over onto its back, unconcerned. Opposite him, the female peers at us, then reinvests her attention in the salmon she is dissecting. She turns her back to us. Minutes pass. Aumiller scrutinized the situation. He's watched this bear, called the spit bear, tend her yearling cubs all summer, and knows that she's a little less protectively aggressive and more likely to allow them to wander farther away. Finally, he suggests that we move slowly as a tight group down to the beach, then turn hard right and proceed along the base of a bluff, which will take us fairly close past her, but never put us between her and her cubs. An eagle alights on the beach out beyond the mother bear, who moves off to investigate, giving us a little more room. We commit ourselves and make all of 10 yards progress before the female moves all the way back, past her fish, to the base of the bluff. We halt. She sits down back to us again. Meanwhile, the cubs have moved further off in the opposite direction. Aumiller takes it all in. Anyone bring camping gear, he says. The answer is no, and he knows it. His touch of humor helps calm the tension. Any volunteers to test that old maxim about mother bear and her cubs, he inquires. None step forward. Well, let's see, who can we afford to lose? We have 2 accountants in the group, don't we? Nervous laughter. Someone brings up the old joke about the slowest runner. Mom rolls us an attentive glance. More long minutes transpire. The tide seeps onto the flats, slowly but perceptibly rising. Aumiller eyes the bear closely, the tide, each one of us. Okay, he says, how about we try breaking the rule this one time? He isn't kidding. He has a strong measure of this bear's unusual tolerance and has assimilated the cues from her behavior this evening. And he points out, we'll still have room to react to her behavior, to retreat if prudent. It's Aumiller's judgment that must prevail, and he offers the group little time for worry. Stay close together. Look slow, but walk as fast as you can, looking slow. And off we go, bisecting the bear family and the cardinal rule with 10 human spirits and the Aumiller acumen for this specific and unusual case. What happens after that is in the book. You can buy it if you want to find out. but I can tell you that the one piece of evidence that you know already is that I'm here talking to you. Well, a question for a lot of people that want to get to McNeil say, how do you get there? And the actual truth is you need an airplane basically, but before that you need a permit, and you can get the permit from the lottery, and you can learn about that at the Department of Fish and Game's website, and or just even say McNeil permits probably, and you could Google that and get the whole story. But anyway, it's 10 people at a time, and they all have to have permits. And to get those, you apply for a permit through the lottery. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But once you have your permit, then you line up a flight, usually from Anchorage or Homer, across to McNeil, and get your stuff unloaded. Those little arrows keep going away from me. As you as you fly in, this is your first look at camp, McNeil Camp. On the left, a couple of staff buildings, a pair of outhouses, a food cache, the cook cabin, and right there, the sauna. So it's every pleasure of home except you're sleeping outside and eating your own food. That first night, you pick a spot in the unfenced meadow in front of the cook cabin. And some of these spots are actually the exact sites of alluvial sod houses, because they spent seasons here as well several hundred years ago. Very historic. Then you go in and have supper in the cook cabin. Now, this past summer and this future summer, they're planning on, and the past summer, they divided the group up, and only 5 people at a time in the cabin to be socially distanced. And they're going to do that again this summer. But basically, all the food stuff, all the toothpaste, anything else that might smell good to a bear goes into the cook cabin, and then you'll be going in 5 at a time and sharing a meal, and you get to know each other. And it's one of the great communal lessons of a community in the wilderness, getting to know 9 other people with totally different backgrounds from you. And by the end of 3 days, you're like one big family. That's what happens in the wilderness. Next morning, you'll convene out in front of the cook cabin, and the guides will, of course, you'll probably be standing further apart than this. The guides will give you the royal ration of rules. Now, these aren't all Larry's rules. He inherited a few of them. The one which he just broke about sow and cubs. The 10 people rule, which was set up by Jim Farrow, the man who, the regional biologist who hired Larry for this job. And 10 people has worked great for the whole time. Of course, no human food to the bears. But on top of that, you want no surprises for the bears. And this comes from, evolved through 30 years in Larry's savvy. But basically, you don't want to stress the bears, and surprise stresses the bears. So you go out, you have the same number of people each day, you go at the same times to the same places, you make no fast movements, no loud voices, and you stay together as a group. Those are key. And together with a few other things, across these years, they have created in the bears a neutral habituation to humans. Neutral meaning they don't look at you as a food source because they never get human food. And they don't look at you as a threat because you never surprise them or approach them or threaten them in any way. Neutral habituation, one of Larry's favorite phrases. So you start out across the estuary, could be muddy that day at a real low tide, or you could be waiting and happy to have those boots on. Now, once you get up on the other side, you get onto a trail, and it's the whole trip is like 2 miles up to the falls. And there's a lot of things you can see along the way, including the fact that you might be watched. And for some folks, it's a little nerve-wracking at first, but the truth is, when a bear stands up like this, it's not a threat. He's trying to get his eyes above the bushes and his nose up in the air to verify what you are. You might see a sow with a single cub. You might see a sow with twins. You might see a sow with 3 little cubbies. Those are cubs of the year right there. And you can see the bluffs and the cliff areas that I was describing earlier. And here's just 3 bigger cubs, older bears. And I just wanted to share one piece of bear magic biology that I learned when I wrote my first book about bears. They typically breed in July or June and July. And after that, a little zygote forms, several of them probably, in each mother bear's uterus. And they cell divide up to the blastula phase, which looks, at least through a dissecting scope, like something like a blackberry, little cells all in a sphere. Those blastulae actually float around in her uterus until just before she dens. And depending on how much fat she has, if she's got a lot, she may have 3 of those that actually implant on the uterine wall and become fetuses. If she doesn't have as much fat, fewer blastulae implant. And if she's a starving bear, none of them will implant. That's a little bit of bear magic that we call being almost pregnant. Here's a couple of youngsters, just pretty starchy, but they're just playing. They're just learning how to approach another bear and do some mock fighting and everything. And when you get something like that, Larry always used to get down on his knees so the other photographers could shoot over his head and get them. He'd even give them advice on camera settings and all that. He claims he's not a great photographer, but he actually is. And he has taken the greats around and helped out a lot of novices at the same time get really good shots. That was Larry, still happening now. Some of these times you don't even need Larry to intervene. You can just let the bear move in. And well, I'll explain this in a little bit. Most of the time, when you're out around McNeil, the bears will walk right past you. They may look at you, as they approach, or some of them don't even bother with you. You have become, because they are neutrally habituated to humans, you're just the same thing as an alder bush. And they're busy looking elsewhere to see if there's another bigger bear that could come down and give them trouble. Larry says one of his famous call phrases was that if the bear isn't stressed, then I'm not stressed. And so this whole thing about no surprises on the bears goes back to the idea of the least force, the least amount of surprise. So even when you needed to move bears out of camp, Larry was first taught to use birdshot in a shotgun or cracker shells or whatever, even loud noises. And that, of course, drove the bears out, but it stressed them. And he doesn't want to stress bears. He learned that he could make as little as just a vocal thing, not loudly, to a bear and turn it out of camp. He had one of their favorite longtime bears that when he was in camp alone, he was sitting reading and he had his door open. It was a beautiful sunny day. And all of a sudden he sensed somebody was there. He turned around and it was one of his favorite bears. It was Teddy. And she had her head inside the door. And Larry looked at her and said, "No bears allowed." And she backed out and left. I mean, it's just Oh, and the other thing he used to do for bears that he didn't know that well was put a bunch of pebbles into a tin can, and he could rattle that tin can, and it's an unusual sound, and it would get the bear's attention, and they would see the human and just walk away, not scaring them, not hurting them in any way. But it's the least, what did I say, least force stimulus to move them when you had to. And on top of all this, Larry came across the idea, for human safety, let the bears decide. Why not let the bears decide? Then they won't be stressed. And if they, because you don't approach them, you let them approach you. And if some of them want to get closer, as we saw before, that's perfect. And what we end up with is this idea that some of these bears are trusting you. And it's not like they like you or anything else. It's an ecological trust, just like the bears trust that there'll be salmon at McNeil. The salmon trust that there'll be tides that can float them in there. It's all the same sort of ecological trust, but this is a behavioral one. And the two species actually have sort of agreed to it. So you can get close. Sometimes they want to get too close, but there's only two places where it's not their territory. And one is the camp, and the other one is where you're headed this day to the falls. And these are the pools in front of these people where the salmon just concentrate, and then they make their runs up over the falls. Now, there's 10 people per, plus a guide or two, and there's only 4 people showing here. The pad is a gravel pad, like about the size of a long, narrow bedroom. And what is sort of interesting is that below it, directly below it, is a little cave, and half the crew often goes down there, and on rainy days, it's a favored position. It puts you in a much more intimate position with the bears, but it is drier. The other place you might go if you go in June, now July is the dog salmon run on McNeil. The other place you might go in June is Mcniel Creek, which is a much smaller creek that flows north into the southern part of the estuary. And so there's some bears there. And here's one, it's interesting because they will come. They are curious animals. But once they recognize you as a human, they're gonna probably avoid you. And if not, all you have to do is stand up or wave your hat, and they recognize that as just some body language, and they just turn around and walk away, but they're not stressed. Here's a better day at Mcniel when that red run is really high. You can have some great observations there as well. And in fact, there are substitutes that are allowed to be out there in case somebody decides not to go up to the falls or out to Mcniel one day and they want to stay in camp and get rest. They have some subs, but the subs that aren't going along have to stay in camp. And from in camp, you can see a lot of bears, even if you're just a sub. And the guides usually try to get you up to the falls at least one day. It usually works out. Anyway, here's Kiana looking out a window that Larry has seen 30 bears at one time out of. So they do come down by camp, and that one out there in the field is not trespassing. That's outside the camp line. But my favorite story about looking out this window is Kiana, when she was really little, one of her first trips up there, she looked out the window and she said, "Daddy, there's a big dog out there." And Larry walked over and put his arm around her and looked down, and here was a big bear. And he said, "Oh, Kiana, that's not a dog, that's just a bear." That would be Larry. Well, most of the time what you'll see at the falls, and I know it's at the falls in this picture because that's a chum salmon, is bears catching fish. But there can be some excitement at times. Well, there's always a little bit of excitement, because at times when there aren't as many fish and they're harder to catch, the bears will, the non-fed bears will wait for somebody else to catch it and then challenge to get the fish away. And sometimes these turn into pretty nasty fights. So some of the bears have learned to run up and run behind the pad and all the human shrubbery on it, and basically just sneak in and get behind it. And hopefully the other bear has shied away by then, and they can eat their salmon for really great close-ups if you like blood and squirting eggs and everything. And I want to tell one story about this. Samantha was our guide one day in, I think it was my first trip in 2000. And we had two bears coming up, one with a fish and the other one chasing it. And they were both running straight for the pad, fast. And they kept aiming at the pad. And they were only focusing on the fish. They weren't looking at where they were going, I guess. And I saw Samantha reach down beside her folding chair, and I thought, she's picking up her shotgun. This could be something. And instead, she came up with two golf ball sized pebbles. And I thought, Samantha, you better have a pretty damn good arm. But she wasn't throwing them. As the bears got closer, she clacked them together with her hands, just clacked them together. And that clacking sound carried down to the bears, got their attention, and they veered off. And I don't even remember which bear got the fish in the end, but I just remember Samantha clacking those stones together. Least full stimulus, no stress. And there's no stress among the staff, especially when there's two of them out there. Sometimes they take a snooze, and the other staff love to get the photo of them, not knowing there's a, 600-800 pound bear nearby. And so the bears do come in close to the pad. Sometimes you got to get up and turn around to get the photos of them. But they 99% of the time, they honor the pad and that territory as humans. And they have the rest of the whole valley. So there's a million things that can see you at McNeil. I won't list all the different species. But there's a lot of bear behaviors that you can see, including here's another one standing up. It looks like threatening. It looks very posed like in the airport, but it's he's just trying to get a better view and sniff you. Sometimes you can watch a female nursing her cub right near you because of the trust. Sometimes you can watch bears making love. Sometimes you can watch a couple of young bears just hanging out in the sunshine, watching mom. Bring us a fish, mom. Sometimes you can watch mom when the young bears aren't hanging on her. And sometimes you can even watch the big males laying back on a sunny day and sometimes just falling asleep while two other pairs of bears are either playing or getting to know each other or whatever's going on. So many behaviors can be seen at McNeil. One famous, now retired black bear biologist from northern Alaska and western Canada came to McNeil and said, it often takes me 2 or 3 days to get one bear in the scope and get a behavior from it. He said, here you have a lifetime of bear behaviors every day. A biologist loves that. Oh, sometimes you can see dancing bears. And sometimes it's not a dance. Larry has mentioned to me that in latter years, there are more big males that come in to the falls than there used to be. It used to be a few big males and a lot of sows with cubs, but now the big males have grown up. They're the bears that have grown up with neutral habituation, and they accept the humans there, whereas the already mature bears didn't want to walk down in front of the humans that much. So these bears overpopulate, so to say, the falls with big guys, and they fight each other to get the best fishing sites. And there are, depending on the flow of the river and everything, there are the best fishing places. And so there's a lot of drama now among the big males. And that makes for a lot of more dramatic photography as well. But there's one other fight I need to talk about, and that's not a fight between bears. It's a fight among humans, and it was happening on Larry's 30th year, 2005, between trophy hunting guides and the BOG, the Board of Game, and the people that wanted to protect the McNeil bears. And what was being considered was opening up more state land close, in fact, right alongside McNeil, and some other benefits to the bear hunters. And it would have threatened things a lot more, because we know, ooh, that didn't come out very well. The biologist before Larry had marked some bears with radio collars and color formations that tell you who the bear is when you see it. They had marked these bears, but to do that, they had to fire darts and basically stress out the bears. And so that ended when Larry took over. But some of those back in the 60s were tracked all over the peninsula. So they leave McNeil and just fan out and go to probably regular migration routes for each one to find other food. And those bears would be wandering out onto the territory that was proximal to McNeil, to the sanctuary. And so they would be readily shot. And, you know, there's a lot of big bears at McNeil, and so they're the trophies, so to speak. And Larry felt that he has betrayed his bears. He had given them the neutral habituation to humans, and indeed, now he might have set them up to walk in front of the hunters that were just outside the boundaries of McNeil. He also felt that the Board of Game would be betraying the bears, the law that I read you about how to protect McNeil bears, and Larry himself. And he retired in 2005. Less out of frustration, I think, and more out of the ability to maybe fight from outside fishing game to maintain the integrity of the McNeil population. And it did work. It did work. They didn't open up those areas. So that was a win for McNeil. About 2 years after Larry left, there was a young fellow in there doing, I'm trying to think of his name and I can't think of it now. A good guy was in, he stayed for 2 years as the manager. And then Tom Griffin was Larry's protege for many years. And Tom Griffin was appointed sanctuary manager. And he's been there ever since, doing a great job. And so Larry actually came back and volunteered a few weeks to several weeks a year just to help out, give the staff a break and get things going. He appreciated the way that the Anchorage Department of Fish and Game had increased the staff size and some time off, and really supported the McNeil staff. And Larry was happy with that. And so he came back and was volunteering. And then it was 2011, he was out to volunteer, but at the same time, he had been putting in for a three-way permit. You can get a permit for one person, two people, or three. And he got a 3-person permit in 2011, and it brought the family out together, because Colleen used to work there with him for a couple of years. They got married there. And then Kiana came along, and now he had 3 people that he just didn't want to let go of. So there it was. He was out there with his family, re-enjoying McNeil with the 3 of them together, 2011. And that I was going to say that that was just Larry imitating bears, because he does that all the time. That very summer, July 19th, I believe it was, Larry was at the falls and they counted the highest number of brown bears ever seen at McNeil, and it's still a standing record. They counted 76 bears at a time. Now there's about 30 of them in this slide, so imagine 76 at the falls. And and that was on the hourly count. In between the hourly counts, they're considered unofficial, but they actually counted 80 bears together at McNeil. So there's a record to be broken. But Larry was extremely happy because the bears were there in higher numbers than ever. And that was the goal of the legislation in the beginning. Well, there's still a few issues going on. The proposed Pebble mine has had a major setback, but our governor now, as most people listening know, is trying to reignite that. Pebble mine would bring in noise, roads, trash, fed bears, cut off migration routes, and just a loss of wilderness by having another port just up the beach from McNeil River. So we're hoping that that goes down. Oh shoot! I just hit end show by accident next to the arrow. How do I get?
That's no worries. If you click on the slide number 71 to your left with the bears fighting, yeah, go ahead and click on that. And then you can go to that present view, that hourglass at the bottom.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you,
worries.
So I just mentioned Pebble Mine. This is the same slide I used earlier because it's the same fight now. Instead of trying to open more land next to the refuge and the sanctuary, the Board of Game is either already done it or is thinking about increasing the number of permits for trophy hunters, and thereby increasing the take, which is already high outside of McNeil there. So it's pretty scary again, and it would mean more hunter killed trophy bears from McNeil. And I think this is where I want to read you something that Larry wrote about this. And it's in the book. In fact, it's on the fly cover because it's so important. But he said, do you want to make it all it can be as the legislature intended? Speaking about the sanctuary. Or do you want to share it with hunting? Sharing is exactly what we do, meaning Alaska Department of Fish and Game, for most areas. How about for just this one area, you don't do that? Seems logical to a lot of us, but we'll see what the politics carry. So hopefully what we'll have is a wild wilderness scene preserved here, a trust with the bears preserved, and a large bear population congregation preserved. That's what we're fighting for. McNeil is one of the rare places that you can literally cross trails with bears and do it in peace. And the other part of the McNeil experience I want to mention is that human camaraderie that comes around by experiencing the wilderness setting, people you never met before that are required to work together. It's just a wonderful wilderness community, and a lot of people comment about that as much as about the bears. So there's so much more I'd like to tell you. I'm afraid about my time, but you can always try the book. Larry and I don't make a lot of money off of it. We wrote it and published it. Well, University of Alaska Press published it, but we got it published in order to share the story. And much more of the story is alive and well in that book. So I think it's available. Well, I know it's available on Amazon and from the Friends of McNeil River. And I meant to say before that for more information about those two things, Pebble Mine and more trophy hunter permits, you can find out a lot more from and up to date from the Friends of McNeil River website or the McNeil River Alliance website. But the best thing you can do is try to get out there and put your boot tracks in amongst the bear tracks. And to do that, you got to go through that lottery. It's open this month to the end of February. You can get on the website and see what the rules are, how to apply. I think it's $30 to apply. I forget what the odds are or were last year, but I think they'll be back up this year again, meaning that you'll have less of a chance. But consider it, even if you don't want to go, consider just applying and giving them the $30 because it's a wonderful donation to McNeil. All of those $30 application fees go directly to support McNeil. Now I have one more thing I want to share with you. And again, it's in the book here. The poet Gary Snyder wrote this in his afterword to a book, The Sacred Paul, published in 1985. And he wrote this: "And each of us, where we live and in association with our neighbors and comrades, must join in a struggle that is not only against oppressive social systems, but in defense of the land, in defense of the earth, air, water, where we live. In taking up this defense, we will become in our own place aboriginals of that place and cease to fear bears." Thank you for being here. I'll answer whatever questions I can or whatever happens here.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we have some people, a lot of kudos coming in on the chat, people saying thank you so much. We have, thanks, Jeff, as always, awesome. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. A couple people who have been to McNeil who are saying it was the best bear viewing trip they've ever done. So yeah, I'll send this chat to you, Jeff, so you can read all these praises as well. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat now. And I did want to also offer on the trophy hunting season that Jeff mentioned on our website. Oh, and I can turn on my video. On our website, I put a link to AWA's comments against that hunt that was approved. It essentially authorizes consecutive trophy hunting years. Since the 70s, it's been an every other year trophy hunt in that unit. And so we currently have a Public Records Act request open to try and understand how that all happened. But if that's an issue that you're interested in keeping tabs on, yes, as Jeff said, follow AWA, Friends of McNeil, and then the McNeil River so there's action ahead on that. That issue is certainly not closed. Gosh, yeah, a lot of thank yous coming through. And I had a question for you, Jeff, as I was looking through, and actually we did have one through the presentation. There was a photo of a mountain that was big and snowy. Do you know what mountain that was? I know there were.
I think it's Iliamna volcano, way in the back, sort of in the blurry white part, but Iliamna volcano to the north of McNeil.
Okay, great. Stacy asks, has social distancing led to smaller visitor groups, and do the bears notice that the groups are smaller? Does that affect bear behavior?
I think let me answer the first one first. It probably hasn't reduced the size of the groups for the most part. And I think the bears recognize a smaller group, but unless it's very much smaller, they put up with it. It's not a huge surprise because it's still people and they're still going at the same time. All the other things are the same. So maybe they get out with 6 or 8 people instead. But that's one reason that they have the substitute things. If you don't win the lottery, but you get a substitute chance, then you can go out and fill in. And probably more substitutes were used last year and will be used this year to fill out the group. And they might end up, some people may not come because of the pandemic, even though they plan on it, and then they change their minds if something goes haywire with the pandemic. Then the subs get a chance to go out like regular members of the group. So I think that's one reason they have subs, to fill out the group each time.
Yeah, great question, Stacy. Bill, who I know has been to McNeil and loves it, he asks, has the peak season for McNeil shifted at all? And can you tell everyone more about what peak season at McNeil is?
Well, peak season is basically the peak run of dog salmon, of chum salmon. And it used to be toward the end of July. And of course, this depends on how high the river is, and how many fish are coming in this year. And in the old days, even how many fish were caught by the fishermen before they got to McNeil River. Now there's a pretty good number of fish coming up. And so the most fish used to come up in the latter part, the late July, and those would be the best permits to get. And now it's moved back sort of toward mid-July, but it's going to vary each year. And you can guess somewhere within like a 2-week band that now it might be to get out somewhere near the middle of July, rather than late July like it used to be.
Okay. Teresa, who I know also went to McNeil, I think just last summer, and raves about it. She asked, if fewer people put in for the lottery, does that give the Board of Game ammunition? In other words, should we all put in for the lottery just so that we can show support that there is, for wildlife viewing?
Well, the Board of Game might use those numbers, but the support is more important, and that doesn't go through the Board of Game. That goes through actually the department and goes straight to McNeil. So for the financial support reason, yes, and for the potential political reason, I see the potential there, but I don't know how much that would affect things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what would affect things, and in the back of my book, there's a section on what Larry and I talked about would improve Fish and Game's management of McNeil. Not that they haven't already improved and that they aren't doing a good job, but one of the things that people have suggested is the Board of Game should actually be a board of wildlife, and it should include maybe one wildlife watching tour guide and a photographer or two, and just people that are wildlife watchers, that maybe professionally or maybe not, but to get a fuller look at protecting all the wildlife and protecting the bears and not just hunting them.
Yes, that's certainly an issue dear to AWA's heart. More balanced representation on the Board of Game. Something that is certainly, yes, we're getting a lot of comments in the chat in echoing the importance of that. Yeah, that's certainly something that we're working towards. And if you're interested in getting involved, please let us know. You can email or contact through the website. And Wayne Hall, who I know has been very active in this issue, did note that there is a current proposal to Board of Game to increase brown bear bag limits to 1 a year. Currently, it's 1 every 4 years for resident hunters in Game Unit 9, which is that area. And he also mentions McFit Creek is also great before the gathering at the falls, and Lower McNeil River and Ender's Island is great after the falls. There's no bad time to go to McNeil. Let's see.
Actually, there is a bad time, and that's in April. And there's a short chapter in the book about this, because I went out with Larry and Tommy Griffin and one other fella in April for a spring ski, and it was 28 below. We had to dig through 10 feet of snow even to get to the cabin. It was actually, it was a glorious time, but there were certainly no bears until late on our way back. We saw one bear coming out of its den. Um, but during the summer, June and July, there's no bad time to go. That's for sure.
Well, and that's one other question we just got. What's the temperature like in the summer? From Marion.
It's the it's the wind and the rain to worry about. They seem to reduce the temperature. And when you get a warm, sunny day, you have too much clothes on out there. But it's typically chilly because of rain or mist and winds. So you want to take a lot of layers and good rain gear. And the more of those you take and the more rain gear you take, the sunnier it'll turn out to be. That's Murphy's Law.
Yeah, that's the rule. Well, I think that's all that we have for questions. But again, there's a lot of virtual applause happening for you, Jeff. So thank you so much for putting this together.
Well, I haven't given a talk for a while, and I was pretty nervous. But I want to thank everybody who did listen in, and I want to thank you, Nicole, and AWA for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with Jeff as well. And
Sure.
yeah, and then I also just wanted to, again, as we close out, thank you so much. These programs like this are supported by our members because we have a Zoom subscription and it takes time to coordinate these meetings. So if you're interested in supporting Wildlife Wednesdays, if you come to these or you're interested in coming to more, I can put a link in the chat for a way you can donate to support this programming. And then I also put in the chat earlier our events calendar with more events coming up. So yeah, everyone is echoing in the chat how great this presentation was. So thanks everyone for joining. I'll hang on the line for just a little bit longer. Jeff, you are free to go or stay on if people have any more questions, but
I'll stay on for a few more minutes.
Okay. All right. Great. Oh, and let me thank you, Laura, who says she's logging on to renew her membership to AWA.
Oh, sweet.
I know. Let me put this in the chat. Yes, and Stacy, I absolutely will repost for where you can find our events coming up. Sorry, I'm like toggling between a couple of screens. Wow, okay, yeah, Patricia says, what a great evening, something to add to her list. She's been to Katmai twice and now has a new place to visit.
This is so much better than Katmai because there's no fences or anything, and you have guides who know the individual bears and have for years, like in Tommy Griffin's case. And it's just a fantastic, well-explained visit.
And I actually filled out my application for McNeil last night. I also applied for Round Island, where I've never been.
Oh, cool.
Yes, okay. We have a question. Oh, can we save some of these bears by applying for a hunting permit, but not using it?
That's a fancy technique, but typically what it does is it just raises the number of hunting permits last year by the percentage of ones that were not used this year.
Yeah, it's a clever thought though. Yeah, let me just read a couple other. Christina says, thank you from a road schooling mama. So that was great. Viola says, thank you, Jeff. Doro says, thank you for a great presentation. Laura, thank you, Jeff and AWA, great presentation. Stacy says, can't wait to read the book. And I also put a link to the Amazon posting in here. Bill says, thanks, Jeff and Nikki. That was an awesome presentation. Thanks for coming, Bill. Yeah, oh, I can just keep on scrolling. If you're ever feeling bad about yourself, Jeff, we can. Hank says the three of us really enjoyed the evening. We're great. We're so glad we could see you. Makes him want to go. I also appreciate the update on potential risks to bears. I want to find ways to help. Thank you, Jeff or Hank. Sorry. Yes.
Is that Glenfer?
Hank Jamieson.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So yes, there should be more news on ways to help. I mean, of course, there's Pebble Mine actions. You can go to United Tribe of Bristol Bay to sign on. We're asking for an EPA veto of the Pebble Mine. That would kill it. And then regarding Board of Game and those seasons, the Board of Game just postponed their meeting until next year, but they're will certainly be keeping in touch. I'm sure other organizations working in the area will too. So yeah, I would follow newsletters or check back in on websites, and that's the best way to help, because comments in support or opposition to proposals does make a big difference. So thanks for being interested and engaged. And then let me I'm sorry, toggling between. Bruni says, thanks very much for the presentation and AWA coordination with the most fun emojis. There's a bear and a hug and a muscle flexing. So that was great. Ken says, having read the book a couple of years ago, your wonderful presentation has inspired me to read it again. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Oh, good.
That's great. Marion, you have some questions about the permit going in circles on the website. So to apply for the permit, when you're on the page, there's a lot of information about the permit and the application process, and it ultimately funnels you to this ADF&G store, and you can go to that store, which I put in the chat, and then you say shop now, which seems kind of silly to shop, but it's shopping for the permit. Once you create a login, there will be options to buy hunting and fishing tags. And then there's a section for wildlife viewing, and it has the application for Round Island, which is walrus viewing, and then McNeil, which is the bears. So, and if you have any continued tech trouble, maybe try calling ADF&G. But that's how I was able to get to it. Christina, who's the road tripping homeschooling mama, I think, she says, my 10-year-old wants to know if you can do a demonstration of walking away fast, but looking like you're going slow.
If I can do a demonstration of that.
That's what she
said. If I could be out in front of a sow grizzly and walking between her and her cubs, I think I could make a demonstration out of that. But I think the idea was not to run and take smaller steps, but move along quickly. Maybe you could demonstrate it for me.
Yes, she says they're practicing. This is great. Exercise. And
see, that's part of Larry's humor, though. I mean, a very tense time for some of those people, and he just used humor the whole way through. And in fact, when we got to the other side of the estuary, Larry was, of course, in the lead, and then he stood right at the edge of the water after he got out and high-fived each of us as we went by, like, you just cheated death again. And the truth is, he was being droll. It was drollery because he knew exactly what he was doing. And we all had faith in him. We had trust in Larry in that case, and it worked.
Yeah, he seems like quite an enigma. What an amazing person. And great experiences. I can't believe that airplane photo. That's really incredible. That it's even there. And then too, you shared it with not many people can say they had a bear as a roommate, even for a night.
Let alone in a C-46.
Yeah, my goodness. Well, it's almost 8:10. It seems like the chat has slowed a little bit. If you wanted to, Bill says, have a great evening, everyone. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, if you wanted to put any praises, if you haven't already, or feedback or questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat now. I'll keep it open for, let's say, 2 more minutes, and then we'll close it down. But it's great to see everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
No, thanks, Wayne. Glad you're here. Good to to see your name. Ed says, amazing, wonderful talk. Thanks. Just gonna, flood you with these praises. And Christina, if you're still on, you should send us a video of your your practice walking. I think that could be pretty fun. All right. Oh, and I forgot to say that I was recording this. Okay, so let me stop recording.